Amira Malik thought she had been chosen for a life of elegance when a Saudi prince invited her into his world of gold and power. But behind the palace walls, she discovered a nightmare of control, cruelty, and secrets darker than she could ever imagine. Amira had grown up in a modest neighborhood in East London, where every day was a battle between paying rent and keeping dreams alive. She worked double shifts at a cafe and cleaned offices at night, barely sleeping, always chasing the idea of a better future. Her friends spoke of glamorous lives abroad, of opportunities that came only once in a lifetime, but she never imagined one would knock on her door. Then came the email. It looked professional, carrying the logo of a well-known talent agency. The words promised something she could barely believe: a personal role in Saudi Arabia, working for one of the royal families. The benefits sounded unreal: luxury travel, a salary that would solve her financial struggles in a single year, and a lifestyle most people only saw in magazines. She reread the message again and again, unable to resist the temptation of escape. Her decision was quick. She handed in her notice, packed her belongings, and told her family she had been chosen for something extraordinary. The agency handled everything: first-class flights, visa processing, even a new wardrobe. For the first time in her life, Amira boarded a private jet, sipping champagne while attendants called her by name. She told herself she was finally stepping into the life she deserved. When the plane landed in Riyadh, sleek black cars were waiting. Her passport was taken for safekeeping, and she was escorted past crowds straight into a vehicle with tinted windows. The journey to the palace was a blur of desert lights and sprawling highways. By the time the golden gates rose before her, she was overwhelmed by the sight of wealth beyond imagination. Amira believed she had arrived at the beginning of her new destiny, not realizing she had just stepped into a cage. The palace loomed like something out of a dream, towering walls of white stone stretching into the night sky, guarded by men in immaculate uniforms. As the car rolled past massive gates, Amira's breath caught. Inside, everything seemed designed to dazzle the senses. The driveway sparkled as though dusted with diamonds, and fountains shaped like golden horses sprayed water high into the air. She stepped out onto marble, so polished it reflected her face back at her. The sheer scale of the palace made her feel small, but also chosen, as if she had been handpicked for a life reserved for the rare few. She was led through grand halls where chandeliers glowed brighter than the sun. The ceilings were painted with scenes of paradise, and corridors seemed endless, each lined with rare art and carpets softer than anything she had ever walked on. She was told she would be serving a Saudi prince, one of the wealthiest men in the region, known for his power and influence. Her suite was a sprawling space larger than her entire flat back in London, complete with silk sheets, mirrored wardrobes, and a balcony overlooking vast gardens that stretched farther than her eyes could see. Gifts were delivered before she even unpacked: diamond earrings, dresses from designers she had only read about, perfumes in crystal bottles. But while the beauty dazzled her, small details unsettled her. Each door she passed had guards stationed outside. Corridors seemed to end in locked gates, and she quickly noticed there were no exits without heavy security. Even her own room clicked shut behind her at night, with a guard posted just beyond it. When she asked about her passport, she was told it was being kept safe with the administration. Surrounded by splendor, Amira didn't yet understand the truth. Every jewel and every wall was another layer of her confinement. The illusion of paradise began to unravel faster than Amira expected. In the first few days, she was told her role would be light work, mostly helping with errands and keeping company with the prince's guests. But as time passed, her duties multiplied until there was no boundary between day and night. She was woken at dawn to prepare clothes, to clean rooms already spotless, to arrange endless trays of food that often went untouched. When the sun set, her labor continued, serving visitors, polishing ornaments, and responding to every command barked her way. The gifts she had been showered with remained untouched in her wardrobe, reminders of promises that had turned hollow. At first, Amira thought the exhaustion was temporary, perhaps a test of loyalty. But soon she realized the work never ended. When she hesitated or slowed, the punishments were swift. Sometimes her meals were withheld, leaving her too weak to stand. Other times, she was locked in her room for hours without light, the silence pressing against her chest. She was not the only one suffering. In whispers and hurried glances, the other women told her their own stories. Each had come from different corners of the world, lured by the same offers of wealth and glamour. They wore fine clothes, but carried eyes heavy with fear. None of them had their passports. None of them had left the palace grounds in years. Their lives revolved around the prince's whims, their labor disguised behind the veil of luxury. Whenever Amira tried to calculate how long she had been there, time blurred. Days melted into one another, a cycle of work and punishment, gilded walls and locked doors. She began to realize that what she had thought was opportunity was, in truth, a trap without an exit. As weeks dragged into months, Amira began noticing patterns that unsettled her more than the endless labor. Late at night, long after the palace had grown quiet, she would hear footsteps in the marble corridors and the heavy creak of doors she had never seen unlocked before. Guards moved with unusual urgency, escorting women through hidden hallways lined with curtains. Their faces were pale, their expressions drained of life, as if they had been hollowed out. By morning, those same women were gone, their rooms stripped bare as though they had never existed. No one dared to speak their names again. Amira's curiosity grew, but it was mixed with a creeping dread. One evening, while clearing a lavish dining room, she noticed a narrow passage concealed behind embroidered drapes. A guard entered quickly, dragging a woman by the arm, and the curtain fell shut. Amira stood frozen, the image burned into her mind. That night, whispers spread among the maids. Rumors that those women were handed over to visiting businessmen, treated as entertainment, and then disposed of in ways no one wanted to describe. The palace, with all its glittering wealth, was hiding something rotten at its core. Everywhere Amira turned, she saw signs she had ignored before. Locks on the windows, cameras in the corners of ceilings, guards who watched every move not to protect, but to contain. Even the servants' laughter during the day felt forced, trembling at the edges with fear. The prince, she realized, saw the women not as people but as possessions, decorations to display, bodies to use, lives to discard. The palace that once looked like heaven had revealed its true face. It was not simply a workplace or even a prison. It was a marketplace of human souls, hidden behind gold and silk. Amira's fears slowly hardened into determination. She could not accept the idea of wasting her life inside those gilded walls. Quietly, she began studying the palace with the precision of someone whose survival depended on it. While cleaning, she counted the steps between guard posts. While serving meals, she noted which doors were unlocked and when. At night, she drew crude maps on scraps of tissue and slipped them beneath her mattress, recording every hallway and staircase she had memorized. Her greatest discovery was an old servant staircase, hidden behind a panel near the laundry rooms. It was narrow and dusty, clearly unused, but it wound close to the outer walls. The knowledge gave her hope, though she knew the walls themselves were watched with ruthless vigilance. Still, the idea of escape became her secret obsession, fueling her through endless days of forced labor. One evening, she spotted a broken phone discarded in a cleaning closet, its screen cracked but still working. She tucked it into her apron, her heart pounding. In the privacy of her room, she tried dialing numbers she remembered, friends, family, even emergency services, but each attempt failed. Every call was blocked, every signal intercepted. The palace seemed to exist inside its own cage of silence. The phone was eventually discovered during a surprise inspection, and her punishment was immediate. She was locked in a pitch-black storage room for days, given only a bottle of water and scraps of bread. Hunger gnawed at her, and the darkness pressed in until she could barely tell if she was awake or dreaming. Yet even in that suffocating isolation, she refused to surrender. If anything, her punishment strengthened her resolve. She knew now the risks were deadly, but she also knew that staying meant losing herself forever. The atmosphere inside the palace shifted without warning. What had once been an endless cycle of rigid routines became filled with tension and hurried whispers. Guards who had always appeared confident now moved nervously, speaking in low tones Amira could barely catch. She overheard fragments of conversations about international investigators, about questions being asked too loudly outside the palace walls. Something was happening beyond the Golden Gates, and for the first time, She felt the faint tremor of change. Days later, the palace was gripped by unease. Deliveries were delayed, visitors canceled their appearances, and the prince himself grew increasingly paranoid. His temper became violent, and the punishments for the women intensified as if he feared losing control. But beneath his fury, there was desperation. Rumors swirled among the staff. Authorities abroad had uncovered evidence of trafficking linked to his private network. Powerful allies who once shielded him were beginning to distance themselves. Then, one night, chaos shattered the silence. The heavy gates that had stood unbroken for decades burst open as convoys of vehicles stormed the grounds. Shouts filled the air, louder than the guards barking orders. Amira's heart raced as she and the other women were herded into a large hall. She thought it was another punishment, but instead, men in official uniforms appeared, speaking languages she recognized from her childhood. They were not guards. They were investigators. The prince was pulled away in fury, shouting and resisting, but there was no escape for him this time. His empire of secrecy was collapsing under the weight of international scrutiny. For the women, the nightmare was breaking open. Amira stepped outside into the night, breathing air beyond the palace walls for the first time in almost a year, the reality of freedom flooding through her like light after endless darkness. Freedom did not feel like the miracle Amira had imagined. When she landed back in London, escorted by officials and placed under protective care, she carried no luggage, no wealth, not even proof of her ordeal beyond the scars of memory. The clothes she wore were borrowed from aid workers, and her body felt weak from months of malnutrition and exhaustion. She walked into a shelter, not a luxury apartment, but even that modest space felt like a palace compared to the suffocating walls she had left behind. The adjustment was brutal. At night, she jolted awake, convinced she was still locked in darkness, still being watched. Every creak of a door made her heart race. Freedom meant safety, but it also meant facing the truth of what she had endured. Slowly, with the help of counselors and investigators, she began to tell her story. Each detail she shared was another piece of evidence against the prince, evidence that helped expose the hidden network of recruiters and agents who had trafficked women under the promise of fortune. News outlets eventually caught wind of the scandal. For the public, it was shocking. Royalty involved in crimes that shattered the image of untouchable luxury. For Amira, it was more personal. Her testimony meant reliving the nightmare again and again, but it also meant preventing others from falling into the same trap. In time, she began to rebuild her life. She found work, modest and ordinary, but hers to control. The jewels and dresses she once thought she wanted no longer tempted her. She understood now that the cost of that kind of luxury was her freedom. Amira's story became a warning whispered to others. Sometimes, the brightest promises are only masks for the darkest prisons. She had survived to reveal the truth.